All right, I want to welcome everyone to this discussion panel presentation on the floating walkway at Terrace Pond in Wawayanda State Park in New Jersey. I'm Amber Ray, the head of strategic communications for the Trail Conference. And this project first got me excited as the editor of the Trail Walker newsletter. As I started getting little bits and pieces of information about the project, realized this was going to be a really big thing, not just for the Trail Conference, but for trail users as well. And so in your 2020 fall Trail Walker, you can read the article, but we also have this presentation with the people who made it happen. And so a little bit on the walkway itself. The muddy area of the Terrace Pond Circular Trail, which is known as the outlet, is home to a difficult crossing where the pond becomes a bog. This crossing historically had a log bridge, but after a series of hurricanes, it was destroyed beyond repair. The crossing has since been a series of floating logs that require a delicate sense of balance. And on several instances, we've witnessed visitors losing their footing on the logs and sinking often up to their knees into the water and deep mud beneath. The pond's natural outlet features sheer rock edges filled with loose organic material. It is impossible to set bridge foundations because there is nothing to set them into. Stepping stones were installed at one end of the outlet by the West Jersey Trail crew 15 years ago, but they are slowly vanishing into the mud. In the absence of a stable surface to build upon, the local geology and geography have made a floating crossing the only option. So the Terrace Pond Outlet Floating Walkway has been purchased through the generosity of longtime Trail Conference supporter Robert C. Ross. It's a modular floating system manufactured by CanDoc, a Canadian company that has been constructing, distributing, and installing such systems for 20 years. The walkway is designed to function either on water or mud, which made it the perfect solution for the outlet, which can be largely water or largely bottomless mud, depending on the season. And here I'm going to throw it to our moderator, Kylie Yang, who is the New Jersey Program Coordinator for the Trail Conference. And she's going to give us some of the statistics for the project. It was completed this year, and begin the conversation.
Hello. Over the course of 2 months, the floating walkway was assembled on site from 19-inch square cubes, each weighing 12 pounds. The cubes are UV and pollution resistant, and the walkway is 3 cubes wide and is 114 feet long. Extending the width of the outlet, it includes railings on both sides. A few statistics for the project. This took 11 crew work trips, 25 different volunteers and trail conference staff that worked on the project, plus New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection staff, New Jersey Forest Fire Service staff, and New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection trail stewards. Work was 781 donated hours. All right, kicking it off. If we could go through and each introduce ourselves, start with your name, affiliation with the organization, and project. I'll start off. I'm Kylie Yang. I'm the New Jersey Program Coordinator for the Trail Conference, and I've helped with logistics and volunteer management and park partner contact as well. David and Monica?
I'm David Day, and we lead up the West Jersey Trail crew, amongst other things, but that's our main thing for this one.
Currently in our 20th year, 21st year?
This is the 21st season of running the West Jersey crew, yeah.
Peter Dolan?
Hey, my name's Peter Dolan. I was the New Jersey Program Coordinator back when this project began, and I'm now serving as the Trail Program Manager on staff for the Trail Conference.
Nick Mckenna?
Well, Nick Mckenna. I've been maintainer in that region for 16 years, volunteer trail co-supervisor for 6 or 8 years. My memory's getting a little hazy. And incoming trail chair. I supervise the volunteers who maintain in that region, and we see on the ground firsthand the impact and the need for the project beforehand.
Bob?
I've been a member of the Trail Conference since 1968. For a long time, it was just the trail walker. In the last 10 years, I've become more involved. I worked with Peter on a number of projects, acquiring land. This is the 5th bridge, I think, that I've been part of. Um, uh, Interested in fundraising, was actually a maintainer. Have done just about everything at the Trail Conference, but only as a volunteer.
All right. And then Amber, I know you've already introduced yourself, so we'll move on. All right, starting off with Nick, let's start with some background information on the trail in the area. Can you give us a little history about Terrace Pond and the trails around it?
Absolutely. So Terrace Pond is one of the scenic gems of the entire state of New Jersey. Trail network up there is long lived. We can, for example, 100 years ago in the 1923 walk book, it was already featured. Got this really cool old-fashioned picture with someone diving off a cliff into the pond. That is, of course, no longer permitted. But again, highlighting this has been a key destination for those who want to get outdoors for the full duration of the Trail Conference's history. The network contains connections to the pond from currently 3 directions: north from Warwick Turnpike, west from Clinton Road, where most people come in, and south or southeast from Stevens Road. The original routes also contained a trail coming in from the east, where Pine Cliff Lake is now, but that's no longer an active trail. It has been, by 50 years ago, by the 1960s, most of our current trail network up there was in place. These trails feature rugged climbs. In some cases, almost have to use your hands to scramble up some short cliff sections. Dave and Monica fixed a few of those for us as well as part of this project. Feature conglomerate pudding stone purple rock with quartz embedded in it, topped by pitch pines. The pond itself is this stunning gem surrounded by cliffs. And it's seen various surges in popularity across the years. Even as long ago as 30 years ago, the author of Circuit Hikes in New Jersey highlighted a recent increase in use and negative impact. 100 years ago, a note was found at the pond exhorting hikers to treat this as the precious wilderness gem that it is. But more to our point here, 5 years ago or so, let's say 5 years ago, social media really kicked off the 3rd or most recent wave of visitation increase. We have seen not just hikers, but you get hikers of all ability levels, from this is the first hike I've ever taken to I've been coming up here my entire life, but a lot of newbie hikers, a lot of families, a lot of young kids, a lot of folks getting out to the wilderness for their first time, exploring our trails. And this use has created kind of 3 challenges or issues. And this project is a key part of the solution to those, all related to sustainability and keeping access open for hikers of all abilities. The outlet crossing addresses the physical challenge of getting around the pond. Kylie and Amber were not kidding about the bottomless mud. You have to kind of balance on your tippy toes through a foot of water on the log. The other challenges and other components to this have been a stewardship program that kicked off, I believe this was its 2nd year, to help manage visitors on site.
And this is actually the 3rd year.
Address some of the
Year 3 of stewards up there. Yep, time flies.
As I said, my sense of time doesn't work anymore, but it is a fairly recent innovation. Helps manage the flow of visitors on site, helps curb some of the other impacts of high use. Used to be a lot of garbage up at the pond, litter, graffiti. While you'll always see some of that in our modern world, it's largely gone. And we've also, my team and I have been leading a project to institute loop blazing, mitigate lost hikers, confused hikers, give more options to folks on the ground. We may talk about that later a little bit, but all of that still needs the centerpiece of this bridge crossing to make it accessible, sustainable. And again, can't say enough, but it's a little, very brief history and context.
Thank you so much for that, Nick. The outlet has been a problematic spot for decades. David and Monica, what have been some of those solutions that were ultimately unsuccessfully implemented?
Well, I've done a little research, and it turns out that there was a viable crossing until Hurricane Floyd in 1999. Hurricane Floyd dropped 12 inches of rain on Passaic County, including Terrace Pond, apparently. I have no idea of the history of this crossing. We suspect it was constructed by actually park staff in the 1970s and 1980s, back in the day when there was park staff to maintain trails. But we've spoken to a couple of people who remember it. Keith Scherer, who is a trail conference supervisor for Terrace Pond presently, as a local high schooler in the 1990s, reports the crossing there was on old logs nailed together with spikes in sort of a hybrid puncheon type raft. And Alan Abramowitz, who is presently the trail conference supervisor for Wawayanda State Park and who maintained that trail there in the 1990s, reports there was a perfectly serviceable log bridge. It was held together by spikes driven through logs that were about 6 to 8 inches wide, and the logs were corduroyed by a chainsaw to aid in traction. Hurricane Floyd in 1990 took most of it out. So hence all of the floating logs.
The floating logs were largely, in fact, as we dug some of them out of the muck and the mire,
we found spikes.
We found big spikes, and we also found the chainsaw scratched surfaces of some of them that had been the treading area. But you know, they were random here and there, so it clearly had been broken up a long time.
So then in 2004, the relatively newly formed West Jersey crew, which is to say us, led by us, placed approximately a dozen rock stepping stones at the east end of the outlet, extending from the beginning of from the rock ledge at the edge of the outlet to the channel. And our grand plan was to install a bridge. And then we did a little more assessing and discovered that it was really bottomless and there was no way to make bridge abutments. So we abandoned that project. Then there was conversation within the trail conference of actually demapping the crossing because it was agreed, you know, there was no way to bridge this thing. And there was pushback on that. And so the compromise up to the current maps is that that location is labeled seasonally wet on the maps, but it is shown.
There were some of the things that were sort of passed through the possibility mill were to literally just put up a cable bridge, you know, a wired suspension bridge. Since it's a stone cliff on both faces, it would be quite easy to anchor it. But the permitting and engineering costs to do that 10, 15 years ago when we were talking about some of this stuff were just through the roof, and nobody at any level really wanted to talk about it, much less the DEP. And we did float the idea of a floatable thing of some kind, but given that there's really no access up there by vehicles to haul stuff in, because at that point all the floating dock type options were these 500-pound floating dock sections that you would pin in with piers or whatever it is. So, you know, we were all, it just kind of, and then it just went away. It's just, the conversation just went away because everybody was going, oh, well, I guess not. Meanwhile, we've had several years, I mean, probably close to a decade of relatively low rainfall net. So the water level in the pond has been relatively low, which means that between the floating log refugees and scraps and pieces and other things that have fallen into the lake and drifted down there, you could make your way across that thing.
Sort of.
Sort of. And based upon the number of flip-flops and shoes and sneakers and socks and things we uncovered in the mud as we were working, it wasn't terribly always successful. So, you know, it's been a number of attempts that just until both the technology and the financing to put that technology in place, really, it wasn't going anywhere fast. So, and
Fantastic.
what we got. So,
So this is directed at everyone. Where did the concept for a floating walkway come from?
Well, I think David answered some of that just now. It's been around as long as the problem's been discussed. However, when we started discussing sort of this modern solution, this was back in 2017, and we had a call getting together to discuss what all the alternatives might be, and the floating dock came up there as it was again floated as an idea. And as David said, the earlier technological solutions had issues, not just the weight and the dimensions of the components, but also the fact that you'd have these long components of floating dock that if they were to be bridged on a rock or a submerged log, they would rock back and forth, and you'd get this very uneven structure if the water level were to recede and were to sit on the muck and the logs. So it wasn't until we did some research and found this specific can dock alternative, which is almost like a Lego brick style modular cube system, that we had something that was flexible enough to sit comfortably, even if the water were to recede and there were to be exposed rocks and logs, which inevitably will be washed under there. I think it was the discovery of that technological solution that made this all of a sudden start to seem feasible.
yeah, it's actually designed for tidal water use, where, you know, some of the time it's floating, some of the time part of it's laying on the gravel, some of it's out in the water, whatever. And it's designed for that purpose. So
I can add a little bit of history. I grew up in Wisconsin, and a company out in Iowa came up with a floating dock. And one of the big problems there is winter. Will the dock go up when the ice is created, or will it be crushed? And this Iowa company came up with great technology. I installed it on a lake that we cleared in an 8-acre lake in Franklin Lakes. And for 20 years, it worked beautifully. The water level would go up 10 feet or down 10 feet. In the winter, it would get frozen in, absolutely no problem. About 6 years ago, Peter and I started to work together at the trail conference. My first inclination, there was even a lake here, is on what we call Terrace Pond North Trail, which comes down from comes south from a highway. And we bought over a period of 6 years 2 parcels of land to preserve the trail. That trail now runs from Route 80 all the way up to Greenwood Lake on protected land. During that period, Peter and I worked on a bridge at Terrace Pond North. That was a standard engineered bridge. It took 7 years, I think, 3 PCs, 8 or 9 or 10, I don't know how many different versions. It just was a horror show. At the same time, John Moran and Chris Connolly worked with Franklin Lakes on their floating bridges. There are 2 little bridges that go to over an island in the what's now called, it used to be called the Helidon Reservoir. I tried to give my floating dock to the city, but they decided they wanted to have similar bridges. I only had 1 dock, unfortunately. And we also considered putting a floating bridge under Route 15 for the Highlands Trail. That was great in low water years, but that culvert carried a ton of water, whatever it really was. And it was just, and the highway department would never let us put it under there. In any event, Peter and I talked about, and I thought, gee, I'd love to have a floating bridge there. It ties to the Terrace Pond North, two properties that we were purchasing. And I guess I was sort of a champion for the idea of a floating bridge. Love to have one. I don't know where to put the darn thing. And so after a particularly contentious Conservation Committee meeting, I got my butt whipped on a proposal. Peter got me in the hallway, said, "Oh, Bob, don't feel so bad. I've got a place to put your floating bridge." And so from my point of view, this idea came from Peter. I was looking for a place to put a floating bridge for years. And I even had a wonderful model of a 120-foot one to go under Route 15 that I carted around and tried to sell people for a long time.
So Peter, you were the one that identified the CanDoc company, right?
That's right.
Just internet search, or did somebody refer you to it?
Yep, a lot of internet searching. I spent a few hours looking at all the vendors I could find and sort of sorted them into several different categories in terms of their modularity, their capacity to be on land and on solid ground and on water without being deformed or damaged. And when it came down to it, the CanDoc product was the only one I found that seemed to fit all the criteria we needed there.
And it's recyclable. It's a 2.
Let's not talk about that. Anyway.
So an innovative project like this doesn't get off the ground without support from both forward-thinking partners and donors. Bob, I know you've touched on how you got involved with this project, but did you want to add anything else?
Well, it is unique in one way because I think it can serve as a model for the future. When Peter came up with this project, he said, "Bob, it's only $30,000. I said, no, Peter, it's $45,000, because one of the things that we do at the trail conference is we count the pennies, but we don't count the intangibles, the time and so on. So this is what I call a blended kind of concept. Peter asked for 30. I said, no, we're going to go for 45. But in addition, the value of the time of the volunteers is another $25,000. And this is a strange thing. It's much easier to raise $75,000 than it is to raise $30,000 and then try to get the rest of that money over time for maintenance and for preparing other bridges and so on. So a key benefit of this project, and I'm not negating safety for people, ease of crossing for all kinds of ages and abilities, EMT people coming to save people that get hurt. The conservation value here of that, keeping cleaner water. I mean, that mud is going to muck up the water. I don't know where eventually that water goes, but I know it goes into reservoirs eventually. And the shore between land and water is particularly fragile. So there are so many benefits to this sort of crossing. But getting back to the money part of it, you can raise money for things like a bridge because people see it. It's very hard to raise money for maintenance. So if a branch comes down and knocks off one of those railings, which you have to predict, it just happened to Jane and Wold on a crossing they built at Yorkville, that's going to cost money. It's going to cost time. So a part of what Peter and I agreed here was that we would, whatever's not actually spent will be put into a fund to repair bridges, both in New York and New Jersey for the future. From a fundraising point of view, this is a very innovative approach, not only for the trail conference, but I found for several other land trusts around the country.
Fantastic. Peter, how did State Park support the project planning?
So we're very lucky to have park partners with New Jersey DEP who are very supportive and from the start. In particular, the local park superintendent, Jessica Krugel. No matter how brained our ideas sounded right off the cuff, she took them seriously and she listened, and she was just enthusiastic and did everything she could to make us feel welcome to go up there to scout and not rule anything out until we had thoroughly investigated it. So once we came across this floating crossing idea, Jessica was on board, and then we worked with the Northern Regional State Park Superintendent, Joshua Wasowski, and he helped us pave the way for the permits and permissions. Because one thing that I do want to emphasize over and over again is this is not a bridge. We call it that just because it rolls off the tongue, but this is a floating crossing, and it's more like a temporary dock structure in terms of the actual installation, the management, the maintenance. So Josh was able to work with us to understand what that would entail from a permissions and approval standpoint. And with Josh and Jessica's assistance, we were able to get something that I honestly thought would take a lot longer from the logistical and permissions end. They sped it right through, and we've got it done, I think, in half the time I would have expected. And then I think Dave and Monica could talk a lot more to the on-the-ground assistance from our park partners.
Well, we also, I don't want to talk about the New Jersey Forest Fire Service.
Yeah.
Which Jessica was the point of contact there and got buy-in from them or commitment from them to assist with this almost immediately. I'm not sure how difficult or easy that was for her to accomplish, but they were really one of the keys to this.
They took, well, for one thing, they took delivery of a flatbed load of bits and pieces, skids, I don't know, 10 skids or something like that of cubes and deck plates for some of the walkways and things like that and all that business. And they accepted delivery of it in their yard and stored it for us. Particularly once the COVID lockdown occurred, it was like we were sort of on ice with this material. So they stored it for us. And while they were holding it, what they did was they repackaged it, took all these skid loads apart, took them off the pallets, blah, blah, and set them up in cargo net bundles.
The helicopter
for
ready.
The helicopter, and parked them on their flatbed truck in the yard, ready to go pretty much on a moment's notice. Like when we and the airplane guy or the helicopter guys were all clear to go. And that literally happened, you know, they did all that stuff. That happened without us particularly.
Okay, well, we get to the helicopter.
Yeah,
further
we'll
on.
get to that.
But,
We'll get to
I
that.
was just going to say, you're touching on our next question, which is directed to you too.
Also, DEP, the Wawayanda staff.
Oh, bless them.
Well, Jessica, part of the support that DEP provided us was lending us their service vehicles so that we could drive on the forest fire road to within less than half of a mile of the work site, which made our commute to the work site light years more easy than it would have been if we'd had to hike all the way up.
Well, particularly hiking in all the tools. I mean, you know, yes, the parts got airlifted, but we still had winches and picks and shovels and rock bars.
Not to mention
chainsaws
ourselves.
and us. Yeah, and all that kind of stuff to haul in there. And as Nick alluded to, the short way, which is to come in from Clinton Road, is, yes, it's
strenuous.
Shorter, but it's I've hiked up there carrying 75 pounds of equipment and tools on my back for previous projects, and it is not fun and not something I want to do week in, week out. So being able to drive the stuff in there, and also for that matter, to be able to drive all the spare bits, the packaging, because this stuff was still shrink wrapped, so we had a couple of many bundles of cardboard and plastic shrink wrap and stuff like that to haul out. But yeah, the West Jersey crew are amazingly lucky to have a really good working relationship with all the park staff folks, maintenance staff and administrative staff. And it just makes everybody's life a lot better.
All right, David and Monica. Getting the materials into the site was a project unto itself. I know we've talked a little bit about the on the ground getting supplies in, but let's talk about the helicopter.
Okay. You want to do?
Well, actually, one thing I can say off the bat, I'm not sure what happened behind the scenes, but part of the initial discussion with Jessica was approaching Forest Fire Service for this being a recertification or training opportunity. Understanding was that to keep current pilot, certifications, they need to log hours to show that they still have, they're sharp, they've got the skills, they're able to pinpoint drop off and lift up materials. So we thought that if they're going to give their time and services to help us with this project, this could be an exercise that would fulfill those criteria for their recertification. So do you have any idea if that happened actually in the end?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yeah, the pilot was actually, there were two different pilots apparently that day when they went away to go get fuel, because they had to refuel at one point. When they went to get a refuel, they came back with a different pilot. And so we had two pilots in the process of the day. And that was definitely a training mission. And they parked the truck down on Clinton Road by the gas pipeline, and they were pick up a load, bring it to us, drop it in. We had about 5 minutes to break that packet down and get it out of the way so they could bring the next one in. And it was all hands on deck, but about every 5 or 7 minutes, a whole cargo load of parts came flying in with these guys. So yeah, it was.
How many loads were there altogether?
10.
10 flights. 10 flights. It was only about, actually, as the helicopter flies, literally not even 3/4 of a mile. So that helicopter got back and forth right quickly. And being that we had to get everything sort of the deck cleared from the clearing that we had made for that, even though it was a big clearing, they required the stuff to be out of the middle, because they would drop it more or less in the middle, and we had to scoot it all away.
And it turns out there was even more people involved in that than just the Forest Fire Service. Where they staged the materials was a pullout along Clinton Road, and they had the West Milford Police Department stop the traffic on the road whenever the helicopter came in to pick up the next load of materials, because the wash from the rotor was so extreme. Actually, it turns out it did take a tree down across the road at one point. So the traffic had to be stopped by the West Milford police while the helicopter was in the area. So there were a lot of people involved.
Yeah.
Once delivered, what were the biggest challenges faced during construction?
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Well, actually, we prepared something because it took us a while to figure out which ones we wanted to talk about. Standing knee deep in mud. Yeah, so the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges was clearing the route for the walkway. When we were planning this, and when we got Peter's assistance to get this approval for this floating walkway that would not impact, what was the jargon, Peter, the riparian?
There are restrictions on canopy clearing in riparian areas and some other sensitive topics that we had to be keen to.
Yeah.
So there was a defined channel, which probably was where this other historic floating bridge had, or floating whatever thing had been. And it's like, okay, we'll use that. But then when we actually started working with it, it was full of submerged logs.
The old logs, some trees,
There were actually
roots,
there
root
were
balls.
actually trees that where the roots, fallen over in the water, the root was still attached.
And because it had been underwater all this time, it didn't rot away. So they were still pretty solid. A couple of them were cedars, so they were never going to rot. So we ended up, one of our guys cobbled up a grappling hook on a cable, and we were grapple hooking these things. I made a wire noose so that we could get an end up. You could get a noose over the end of it and pull it out with a line. Later on, we actually, once we got some of the floats going, we used one of the float modules as a raft. And I went out on the raft and using a chainsaw down in the water, sawing these things out underwater and then hoisting them out with the grip hoist and hauling them away and that kind of stuff, because there was just, while this float could theoretically sit on top of this stuff, it was never going to sit nice. It was never going to really be level. And it was only going to get worse when the water level went down. When the water level went up, it'd be okay. But we just figured this stuff's got to get out of the way. And it was all just mostly floating flotsam and jetsam and stuff.
But some
stuck in
of
the
it
mud.
was really, really large.
Big stuff. Some of there were 15 and 20-inch diameter logs down in there that were not interested in coming out without a whole lot of discussion. So anyway, we ended up with that.
Peter, when we went up with Peter and Nick, and I don't remember who else, we ended up with Scout and go, yeah, sure, right there. And there were a couple of places where sure, right there wasn't quite wide enough. And so we're like poking at the mud on the bank, and lo and behold, here's a huge, very intact stump that we had to deal with. So yeah, right there got really complicated.
Yeah.
And then the second one that we flagged was the challenge of assembling the walkway in place. Now, actually, that's what CanDoc recommends, is that they will deliver this thing in sections and you install them in the water. Right. The problem is, to install it in the water, you have to be on the thing. But the two pieces that you're connecting need to be level. Now, if you're on one end of it in the water, guess what? It's not level.
And none, because there's all these rings and bolts and things that connect them together. And so what you've got is, instead of this happening, it's going together like.
And well, it's not.
It's not going together. So we ended up having to figure out how to levitate on top of the mud next to the unit so that we could align them, get a bolt or two into it. Then you could get on them and finish. But, sort of standing around on I don't know what, we had a couple of the guys came up with these glorified snowshoes made out of big sheets of plywood that sort of stand on and if you got on them and you did your business quickly, you wouldn't disappear. But that was interesting.
I guess it was a good thing that the water level was low this summer. Well, that really compelled us to remove all the stupid logs, but it also gave us the opportunity to stand next to the dock to assemble it for all but a couple of the units that were out in the channel where there's always water.
The center channel is clear water.
A lot of it was this bottomless mud, which we could deal with this with our little
plywood snowshoes
platforms.
The problem you're talking about was when I built my floating dock, the way I solved that is one of these big exercise balls that are about 36 inches in diameter, and I would push it underneath to get it level, because they won't fit together unless.
Cool.
Exactly right.
But okay, I want to know how you got something the exercise ball under the dock.
I kept, I had a little pump and I would let the water out. It's just like if you see a big semi truck try to get under a bridge, let the air out of the tires,
Put it in
then
place.
pump it up again.
Got it. Yeah, I'm like thinking of this huge thing, and how in the world do you submerge it?
Well, it gets very thin. It's only an inch thick if there's no air in it.
Yeah.
Well, and for anybody who may be watching this in the far, far future, it's worth noting as well that this was done in 2020, the year of coronavirus. And so while maybe not the biggest logistical challenge for this project, it did mean that some of our early ideas, such as having teams of volunteers to come out and, you know, almost act as army ants to carry these cubes to place and pass them off fireman style, anything that involved a lot of people working together just was right off the table, because during the coronavirus pandemic, the trail conference has been limiting trail crew work to longtime members, not as much online promotion and recruitment of new volunteers. So this was all done just with the real core West Jersey crew members. And that meant that we didn't have access to larger groups of people or more public involvement that potentially might have helped with some parts of it.
Well, it turns out that we were able to rig a high line from the staging area all the way across the walkway.
It's a 400-foot high line.
And which meant that we could move all of the materials to the point where they were being assembled through the air on the high line. So we didn't need vast numbers of people to carry things.
Yeah.
And I think that alone was what enabled us to get this thing done as relatively quickly as we did.
Yeah, because what we did was we assembled, well, they shipped us the units with 6 of the full cubes assembled that's because that fit their skid work well for shipping. We put the finishing cubes on the outside of it. But that resulted in a thing that weighed 300-400 pounds, something like that. Not even that much. So we could, no, it's 150 pounds. That's right. So you could just, a couple of guys could pick it up, carry it over, stick it on the high line, and just fly it down. So we'd put a couple of those, get them down on the, as we were building the deck, we now had a flat work surface. So we would bring the pieces down and assemble as many of those as we could together, slide them off the end, and then just have to fight with the one dip. But that, and there's pictures and stuff that I assume will end up in here, including whole big armloads of bundles of the stanchions for the railings and stuff like that flying in a bunch and so on. All of this at the bottom of a 20-foot ladder or cliff face climb, one way or the other. So it would definitely, the High Line was the lifesaver for this thing.
And I say, you just mentioned the cliff. If you had not had the High Line, the trail between your staging area and your work site climbs straight down or straight up the biggest cliff on the whole mountain, which you guys also, as part of their project, they put a ladder up. Another little benefit.
Well, and actually,
self-interest.
Actually, that was really slick, if I say so myself. Once this project got, the planning was underway, and the Forest Fire Service, we met with the Forest Fire Service, and they offered to stage the stuff and this and that, and they were like being really forthcoming and cooperative. We said to ourselves, we want to build this ladder. What's the chance we can get them to include the materials for this 20-foot ladder in the airdrop? No problem.
Sure.
Just get us the stuff.
Just send it on over. We'll do it.
So that way we didn't have to carry in materials for this ladder from the end of the fire rug.
And we used the same.
And that was the first thing we did was build that ladder, because
while we were setting up the grip hoist and the High Line and all that stuff, we had a posse a team building that ladder and installing it. And we ended up shuffling it around because where it was first put in, it didn't have a really good base to set on, and we ended up basically shuffling it around and building a proper rock foundation for it. And it's now pinned, rebar drilled in, pinned to that rock, so they can't go anywhere.
But what it replaced was, well, a rock scramble up, and actually, at least for me, a butt slide in a couple of places down. And I said, no, I'm too old for this.
And in the wintertime, it was a very, very nice ice climb practice area.
Yeah.
Because there's a seep at the top.
So
And then after that ladder was installed, I did ask one of the trail stewards. I said, knowing that this is an area where there are a lot of search and rescue operations, are most of the people who need to be extracted in that condition because of the cliff jumping, or are they hikers who are just legitimately falling off the scrambles? And they confirmed that more people are just falling off the rock cliffs than are actually being injured by the cliff jumping. So having that ladder there was a big relief to the search and rescue folks I know.
Well,
and the walkway.
Yeah.
They were so excited.
One of our volunteers is a member of the local
West Milford
Search and Rescue team. And when she saw what we were doing, I thought she was going to kiss us all. She says, this is the greatest thing because, well, brief side thing, the thing about the helicopter, we had to come up with an area for the stuff to be dropped. And we managed to find a place that was strategically wonderful in terms of all the high line and all that kind of stuff. And we went in and we flagged it, put, ring around the thing with some caution tape and so they could see it from a flyover.
It was a treed area.
Yeah, it was a treed area, but it was the trees were mostly dead, and it was mostly sort of a regrowth area. And it was like, oh, this is even in a good location.
Level.
It's level, and it's 30 feet from the edge of the top of that cliff. So it's like, oh, this is really the right place. So anyway, so we marked it up, and Peter and I went with the pilot to do a flyover of that location to identify the spot and stuff like that.
And have the pilot confirm that the area that we had
was flyable,
identified was big enough for them to drop the stuff in.
And he said, yeah, it would be. That would be big enough to drop in. Time passed, and when the time came to actually clear the space, the Wawayanda maintenance head, Steve Marino, and
who is part of the
Forest Fire Service, and a couple other forest fire guys went up and actually dropped all the big trees for that space, so that when we came in, all we had to do basically was clear it up. But they enlarged the space from the original 60-foot-ish square area that we had laid out to almost a full acre. And the idea is that it is now a landing zone and they called it from the day one, the fire guys called it a landing zone for their evac helicopters.
Yeah,
and and fire helicopters. But
they got all excited when we identified it.
Oh, they were all yay, so.
Yeah, and we had been trying to be really circumspect and limit the area that we were going to propose to clear for this drop so that we wouldn't require taking down any big trees, because we didn't want to have, sort of create problems with the park with taking out, requiring trees to come out. And the forest fire people just said, no problem. They cleared the entire area. I don't know how many big trees they felled.
Four big trees and a handful of smaller ones.
But it was a win-win-win. We got our staging area. They got a helicopter landing area.
They got their practice. We got our material, and we all got a crossing.
Yeah.
Really no shortage of creative solutions to problems in this group.
But I had a couple of notes before you move on. I'm very impressed with the complexity of what you accomplished and how you got around problems and so on. And this goes back to the fundraising point. You can't anticipate all of the problems when you put a deal together. That 50% override might have turned out, if you couldn't have found all these other people to help you, to be much too little. And if you would have had to pay for all that, so then you have to go back to your funders and say, oh, we screwed up, we didn't ask for enough money. That's one reason I say it's better to ask for too much at the beginning than too little. I'll just add a footnote. This is New Jersey. There are two words you shouldn't use for this project. One is bridge. This is a crossing. It's not a bridge. The second is, don't use the word historic, because if you're building a bridge in a historic area, you got to get a historian to come in and tell you whether you're going to screw up all the history that's hid in the mud. You mentioned that some of these logs were historic. Well, I know that they were just for the old bridge, but in other cases, that can take years to resolve. We had that problem at Long Pond Iron Works.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, to me, historic is 50-year-old logs floating in
Yep.
water. And I understand that's a loaded term, so
Yeah.
I stand corrected on that.
Yeah.
Not
this-
corrected, it's just a caution.
Yeah. When I said historic, I was meaning the long departed old log raft thingy or whatever Keith called it.
The record is clear.
Steve, next few questions are for everyone. What are your personal project highlights?
I can start. One thing I love about this project is just where it originated. And this was a few years ago. We had a regional trails council meeting, so volunteer leaders from across New Jersey coming together, and we posed a question to the group. As people went and made their introductions, we asked, if you had access to unlimited resource, money, time, materials, or no object, what's your pie in the sky dream idea you'd like to see accomplished? And the supervisor, Keith Scher, for this region said that he wanted this crossing done. And it was that sort of crowdsource, let's assume that nothing's too big for us to accomplish. If we had everything at our fingertips, what are the impossible problems you want us to try to solve? And we took that conversation, that sort of, that one-off introduction exercise, to start a real serious conversation about this, and it sparked everything that we've talked about today. So it really shows how important volunteer leadership is, from not just David and Monica for the actual logistics and leadership, or Bob for the materials and the support, but also just for the ideas and identifying what the priorities for the regions are.
We each had a couple of, well, we each had our own, and then one we shared. The high point for me was locating the landing zone, the staging area, because it was like, by finding that gem in the woods, and I poured over Google Maps and the satellite overviews and stuff, looking, and with Jeremy's maps to try to find a flat place that was close enough that we could do something with. And so finding that was just, for me, that was like, yes, and so that was a highlight. And the other is when we got the walkway about halfway built, and for the first time I walked out onto the walkway into the middle, what was the middle of the channel, and looked up the pond. It is gorgeous. It is stunning. And it's the first, I mean, I've been back and forth in the process of this project, hopping and logs, swinging.
Yeah, you're paying attention to
You are looking at your feet. You're not looking at anything else. And now for the first time I walked across it, oh my God, this is gorgeous.
Yeah, and also back to the helicopter scouting trip, I have to say that's probably my favorite Avenza map app track is from the helicopter. I had Avenza on, so you can see the loops as we spiraled and swooped around and flew back. So
that is really cool.
Yeah.
My highlight was seeing the first hiker, at least the first time I saw a hiker cross it. I was up there on a weekday evening, maybe 2 days after you guys finally finished it and the trail was open. I was painting blazes to mark the new ladder and the reroute. And I saw a group of, young folks hiking across it. And normally when I see people crossing that lat, I'm wondering, am I going to need to render assistance, or is there going to be some sort of hilarious mud coating to put on the YouTube, or they were just casually walking across, enjoying the view, and then they went up the ladder. It was a revelation. You can walk across this outlet that used to be an adventurous tiptoe while praying through the mud kind of thing. That was wonderful to see. A secondary thing, but big shout out to Dave and Monica. Not only did you fix the outlet, the primary purpose of the project, you fixed everything else on the trail. You put up the ladder, you built some stone steps the past few weeks. They leave nothing unturned.
We fixed your mess
We fixed your
at
reload.
on the Red Trail.
Thank you for that as well. But they are good. I can't thank them enough.
Nick and Keith apparently tried to do some trail work without tools. I have no idea how you pull all those rocks
Yeah, I don't know
out.
how you got what you got, but
By hand. We're crazy.
Yeah, but it's one of these areas where there's rocks on top of rocks and nothing in between them except a little bit of organic stuff. And they created these great divots. And then they ended up coming by where we were working and said, could you help us out here? And it turns out that was our last day on the rock staircase, and we were done by noon. So it's like, okay. So we went and repaired it
we addressed that.
armed with trail working tools as opposed to just bare hands.
Well, trail working tools and 6 people.
No, more than
8 people, whatever, a lot of people. Which brings us to your favorite.
Yeah. Two personal project highlights. The same thing David was talking about with finding the staging area. It was like a load off of my mind. Like, this thing is going to be doable. The idea of having to receive the helicopter drop clear over on the other side and have to schlep every component over the rugged trail to the outlet. It was just not something I even wanted to entertain.
And hundreds of trips.
And this, it's like, wow, this will be doable now. It was just such a relief. But the other personal project highlight, other than having the thing done, was just the crew. And they're just resilient, creative, problem solving. They kept coming back. Remember, it's summer. It was probably,
we don't normally work
like
during the summer.
85 degrees most days by the time we left.
More than that.
In addition, we usually meet, the crew work trips usually meet at 9 o'clock. We moved the meeting time up to 8 a.m. because the state park staff that brought us the service vehicles had to be off the clock at 3:30, which meant we had to be back to turn the vehicles over to them by 3. 9 to 3 was
with an hour's
the
drive
commute
at each
time,
end.
into the woods. And so David and I looked at each other and said, 8 a.m. And so then we asked the crew, and they all said, yeah, sure, we'll get more done. God bless me.
Yeah.
And they were doing this, back to that earlier point about it being 2020. A lot of this work was done in that extreme heat and humidity with the magic combination of safety glasses and masks on, which was another layer of discomfort. So props to everybody involved.
Yeah, they were just, I mean, we sing the praises of the crew folks to anybody who will listen to the song, but you can't do it enough. These guys and women, I shouldn't say guys, this crew is amazing. They do amazing stuff. They make it look relatively easy, and they make us look good doing it. So
at times it's hard to come up with enough work to keep them busy.
Yeah, that's become our biggest problem at late, is that we got to find big enough projects to keep them all busy.
They became experts at assembly. They became experts at moving stuff on the high line. They became experts in knowing where to find things and how to put things together, and everybody just tucked in and went to work.
I have 4 high spots that came out of this. The first is, I mentioned that Terrace Pond North, we made 2 acquisitions of land to protect that trail. That made that effort well worthwhile. The second is, and I've mentioned it, this was proof of concept that a blended fundraiser will work. And I'm looking forward to doing more and more of those in the future. The third is your idea of being able to stop in the middle of the bridge and just look at nature. In Franklin Lakes, one of the most beautiful views in New Jersey is to stand and look at Tall Mountain to the southwest from one of those floating bridges. It's just magical. But the final point is really the people that are on this video. To see what you contributed, how well we worked together. I've known Peter a long time. I've met 3 new people for sure. The effort, the commitment, the way that staff and volunteers work. I think it's one of the most magnificent parts of being part of the Trail Conference. And I'm very proud. I've been there for over 50 years. This is a real high point for my career. Thank you all.
Thank you.
So if people want to check this walkway out, what hike routes do you all recommend to hikers looking to explore the area?
There are so many good ones. We do want to highlight that we have one of the other projects we mentioned briefly at the start. We have reblazed and expanded the network up there. So definitely refer to our new map. The shortest way to the pond is going clockwise on the new yellow loop, the former western half of Terrace Pond North Trail. It's now called Terrace Pond West in that portion. It's 1.25 miles to the pond, steep, rugged, short. You want a short adventure? That's your way in. Circle the pond. My favorite personally is trail section that's is the blue trail, Terrace Pond North. I am the personal maintainer of the trail section that you folks just preserved with these purchases. Start from Warwick Turnpike. It's 2.25 miles into the pond. You can then loop around the pond and retrace your steps for 5 miles round trip. You can, or follow the brand new blue loop, including some stunning, lightly used gentle terrain that we just opened this summer. It's about a 7-mile round trip. Those are my recommendations, but there's no such thing as a bad hike up there. It's all good.
Agreed.
I think one of my favorite hikes is from Warwick Turnpike up to the pond. And there's like the center section of that trail. It was an extensive reroute done by the West Jersey crew in 2008. We didn't lay it out. We cleared it, constructed it. But the center section used to be a slog up the pipeline. And were you maintaining, Nick, when at that point?
Yeah, I've been maintaining since 06. I think you guys put that in 08. Yeah, okay. The pipeline route that their reroute eliminated it's probably literally this steep. It's loose rocks, it's gravel. I like scrambling. I go scrambling for fun, and this is unpleasant for me. No one wants to hike it, even though it looks great on the map. And in place of that rough slog in the summer sun, there's no shade, they put in this beautiful switchbacking climb up to a ridge, beautiful stream section, pitch pines along a ridge with views. It turned the trail from it's decent to this is one of the gems in the state.
Yeah, and it's also worth saying that the little bit of pipeline co-alignment that remains is actually looking better every year. I think I last hiked it maybe 4 or 5 years ago before my recent hike. And the amount that it's grown in, it's actually a really beautiful change of scenery. You're walking along something that was replanted with lots of native grasses, and it's grown up, and it doesn't feel like the gravel slog it used to be. So it's certainly worth checking out for anybody who may have hiked it a long time ago and wants to revisit. It's inspiring to see nature come back like that.
Yeah, I am absolutely, well, I'm looking forward to your new Blue Loop. We haven't had a chance to hike the other half of that. But I'm also just so thrilled that when I hike up from Warwick Turnpike, I can now go around the lake and then come back.
And we will, ASAP.
So does anyone have any final thoughts to those who might be inspired by this project and are looking for ways to get involved in trail and conservation work?
There's many ways, but first, if you like getting your hands dirty, we're always looking for volunteers to adopt a section to maintain. It's like adopt a highway, except you're not litter pickup, you're keeping the trail open. I know Dave and Monica may be looking for new volunteers. I don't know if we're accepting new volunteers during Corona, but Corona will end eventually. That's for those of us who like to get their hands dirty. There are other ways.
Yep. So Bob spoke earlier about the Conservation Committee, which works on land preservation. And we're always looking for more people with that background and experience to be involved in preservation and land advocacy and open spaces. So beyond getting your hands dirty, as Nick described, there are many ways to be part of the Trail Conference as a volunteer.
And on the fundraising side, if I can't tell you how gratifying it is to come with an idea, raise money, and then see something real and beautiful come out of it that has so much value. And we're talking about forever. As long as there's New Jersey, this property will be preserved. And this crossing is going to last a long, long time. You can really create a legacy by raising funds for a project like this.
I want to thank everybody for participating today. I am personally so honored and proud to work for an organization with so many amazing people who care so much about natural areas and trails and making sure that there's safe, enjoyable access to the outdoors. So thank you so much. You can find more information on our website. That's nynjtc.org. There's further information about the stories that everyone spoke about here, maps and hike descriptions. So check it out, and we'll see you on the trail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.
Thank you.